Okay, so last time we really did some of the most basic stuff. Maybe we can do a quick recap.
Yep.
So we can continue on from there because it was like a couple of weeks ago for me. For you, it might have been just now, but I don't remember almost anything, and I didn't touch it just so that I wouldn't, so that my reactions would still be real. Anyway, so what were we doing actually?
We were actually talking about the basics of React, which is what is a component, what is a React element, state handling, and properties, and all that. So let's do a recap, and let's look at this code that we created last time. First of all, we're doing everything inside an HTML file, and today we're going to change that because nobody writes this way. Everybody writes using modern tooling. We'll learn about the modern tooling in this episode, but it's a good way to start understanding React. So we talked about what is a component, and a component is in React, it's just a class that extends the base class, which is React.component. It has a render function. A render function generates React elements. How does it generate React elements? Using React.createElement. You can see that in line 19, we've aliased React.createElement to be just create. And then in the render function, we're creating 3 React elements, a button, a span, and a button, and then wrapping it inside a div. So deck button is a React element. We'll talk about the onClick later. Span is another React element, and button is another React element. Remember, React elements are not DOM elements. They are, in a way, the virtual DOM, which will be translated by React into the real DOM. Okay, so we're creating those, and we're creating a div which has as children the 3 React elements: deck button, counter span, and ink button. Okay, you can see this. You don't see the.
You want the mouse?
You can see this here: deck button, counter span, and ink button. So these are the React elements we created. We've created a tree of React elements, and we're returning it. That is what render does. It renders whatever you want into a tree of React elements, React will call this render function, generate that virtual DOM, that tree of React elements, and then render it into a real DOM. Where does it do that? It does it here, React DOM.render. We're creating an element out of our component. So create, React.createElement creates, accepts either a string, and then it's just, a div, a button, a span, etc., or a class, and then it creates an element from that instance of the class. So we're creating a React element from our counter component and injecting the resultant DOM into Groot, okay, which is the div we created right here. So remember, we have React components, which are these. We create React elements out of them here. React will call the render function on that React element. This will create a tree of React elements, and it will render those React elements into real DOM elements by itself. That was the first thing.
Yeah, and then we added some behavior.
Yes. We wanted to remember it's a counter button, so it has a number, that's the span, and it has 2 buttons to increase or decrease that number. And the behavior was onClick. Here I say onClick and call decrement. We'll talk about bind in a second. And in this onClick I call increment. Okay, so I just call the methods on this. So let's look at increment. In increment, we change the state of the React button. We call setState, and we say the state of the value that we've created here, we've initialized here in the constructor. The state of the value is the previous state of the value plus 1. That's increment. And we've initialized this state here. This dot state, it's important to call it state because React looks for that member when it's handling state. When we change the state, what will happen is React will re-render our component on its own. We don't need to do that. It will re-render, and how will that make the span go higher? If we look at counter span, we were creating a span, and the text of that span is this.state.value. And because React incremented that using our this.setState, this will have the new value, the new correct value. Decrement is exactly the same.
So I have a couple of questions. First of all, value, is it like a common word, or is it something that we created called value?
No,
this is the state we created there, right?
State is
value could be anything.
Yes, it could be. Actually, state could be anything. It could be a number.
Yeah.
We could have state as just, this dot state equals 0.
Mm-hmm.
But usually state is more than one thing. Yeah. So we're usually creating it from an object. So this is an object. It could be value. It could be foo. It could be bar.
So it's just a property of the object. Really.
Exactly. It's just a property.
And my
but
second
state,
question,
this dot state is important. This is the member that React is looking for when it's talking about state, when it's dealing with state.
Okay. And my second question was, if I remember, we were talking about ECMAScript and a bunch of other stuff. Here, I can see that, for example, in the line currently activated, in line 25, we have like the semicolon at the end. But in line 40, do we need we still need semicolons, but is there any difference in terms of the syntax that we're using here that is different from classic JavaScript here?
Not in terms of semicolons. Semicolons are from, I don't know, ES5, ES3, ES1 maybe.
Yeah.
But class and constructor and super are definitely ECMAScript 6 features.
Okay.
Previously, we would have had to transpile this into ECMAScript 5 to make it even work. Mm-hmm. But currently, today, all browsers, except IE 11 or whatever, understand ECMAScript natively, ECMAScript 6 natively, so that is not a problem anymore.
So is extends part of ECMAScript 6?
Yes, class extends, const is part of ECMAScript 6, and I think that's about it.
And just at the top, we have the imports. We just did two imports for React.js and React DOM development.
For React and React DOM.
That's it.
And as we said, React is the more abstract, cross-platform library, and React DOM is the binding for web. We have also React Native for mobile development and React Windows for Windows development, etc., etc.
Perfect. Okay, so this was the summary, and in the next video, we're actually going to start taking this to the next level.
Yes, because as I said, nobody in the next episode. Now we're going to talk about.
This is just like let's call it a between episode.
Yes,
so we'll take this as a separate video, and then people can use it just as a summary. Mm-hmm. And the next episode, they can just start from scratch.
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay.
Now nobody writes like this. I mean, well, they do write the code like this, but nobody writes inside an HTML.
Yeah.
If you think about, any web application, front-end application today, if we would have needed to write it inside an HTML or even inside a one big JS file, which is script sourced, that's huge. Front-end applications are as big today as back-end applications, so we're talking hundreds and thousands of lines of code. That's not possible in one file.
Yeah.
So fortunately, we now have modern tooling that enables us to write in a more modern and better way than this. So we'll talk about tooling right now. We'll talk about Babel. We'll talk about Webpack. Maybe if we have time, we'll talk about ESLint. But Babel and Webpack are the main ones,
okay,
which show how to do that. Specifically, we'll start with I don't know. We'll think about it.
Figure out in the next video coming right up.